Cairo, Seattle.
It's time to get schooled with the professor, John Clayton.
Welcome to Schooled with the Professor, and of course, I think maybe two of the things could be solved. I'm not sold totally the catch rule has been completely resolved, but I think the one thing that now may be happening, which I think is a sensational positive for the National Football League, there might be a developmental league. The Alliance of American Football is going to be starting up here, and Bill Polian got himself involved with it with a cast load of guys like Jared Allen and Troy Polamalu and J.K. McKay. Bill, please tell me, as a Hall of Fame general manager, is this finally going to be the developmental league that's been long overdue and coming back?
Well, I certainly hope so. You know, we tell people that we're not necessarily a developmental league. We're a complementary league. We augment the NFL, but there's no question that player growth is one of our goals. And if we were fortunate enough to turn over our teams every season and have everybody make it back to the National Football League, it would be we'd be doing everyone a service. So, in that sense, I'm looking forward to being involved and looking forward to this coming season. And the most important thing to remember is that we are not a competitor of the National Football League. We're a standalone operation that works in the spring that we think appeals to a specific group of football fans who would like to have football virtually year-round.
Well, tell me how this all started, because obviously, I mean, for more than a decade, there's been a bunch of groups that have been at least proposing and maybe trying to set up developmental things to either work with the NFL or to augment what the NFL's needs are with players that, you know, may have been on the street for a little bit and young players. I mean, how did this organization start?
Well, Charlie Ebersol, who's the son of longtime NBC sports head Dick Ebersol, came to me about a year ago and said, I have this plan for a spring league. Would you take a look at it and tell me if you think it's viable? And I did. And I said, yeah, it's viable for two basic reasons. Number one, but actually there are three. Number one, it's centrally owned, so the league operates every franchise. Secondly, you're in a situation where we're in markets that are basically underserved with respect to professional football. And third, there's enough funding and investors to stand the gap to make sure you can stay up and in operation for 2 or 3 years. And then that being the case, the only thing that was left to do was to flesh out the skin and bones, put it together from an operational standpoint, which is what I've been involved with, and then to get a network broadcaster, and that's fortunately CBS. So we're off on the right track. Everything's in place for it to go. Now it's about coaches and players and markets, and that's what we're working on right now.
So now, how many cities and where would these cities be located for the teams, and when would these start?
Primarily in the southern part of the country, because we are, after all, a spring league, and then we'll kick off on the 9th of February, the week following the Super Bowl, and we will end on draft weekend or the weekend after. We're not firmed up yet on that. Just a function of how we schedule the playoffs, and then the nice thing about that is that at that point, every player is free to go back to the National Football League if they get the opportunity. So our players come free, as opposed to what happened with the World League, which was the last spring league that really worked. Our players are free to go back just at the time OTAs are beginning.
Can there be a period where maybe some of the teams can start to place the players on those teams if they're willing to do it, or is that just going to be players that are on the street or developmental type players?
Well, the player would have to be willing to go and would have to be free of his NFL contract. That's a function of law, and we're going to honor all existing contracts from every existing league. So the player would have to do it voluntarily, but if he were willing to do it voluntarily, we certainly would welcome him with open arms.
How viable do you see right now everything going as far as just the interest itself? Because, again, this is something that I've been whining about for so long, the need for it.
So have I. That's why I decided to put my effort where my mouth has been. The response we're getting is really amazing. It's hard to believe that based on one announcement we could get as much interest from fans, from media, from players, from coaches as we have. But my phone has been ringing off the hook, as has Charlie's, and there are lots of people who obviously are excited about this. So that's all to the good. We feel good about that.
Well, that's a good thing. So now when you put this all together, talk about just the World League, NFL Europe. How good was that for the NFL as far as, at that time, in the late 90s and that you were able to send players over, and quarterbacks like Rob Johnson and John Kitna and even Kurt Warner were able to develop over there. And of course, there's such a need for getting guys who are, developmental play, particularly with now the way it is in college with spread offenses and also with air raid offenses. What's been the void that you've seen?
Well, the void is exactly what you described. Add to that the 20-hour rule in college, which means that players get less time to hone their skills, less time to practice than they have when the World League was in existence. The World League did a phenomenal job of developing players, particularly quarterbacks and offensive linemen, but kickers as well. Adam Vinatieri is a World League alumnus who will be going to the Hall of Fame. Kurt Warner's already in. It developed players, coaches, officials, and front office people. And the only thing wrong with the way it was in Europe, so people in the United States didn't see much of it and didn't get the chance to interact with it. And secondly, the timing was wrong because it finished just about a week or two before players were ready to go to NFL training camps, which was a big burden physically on the players who had been over there and were coming back to try and make NFL teams. So we rectified that by changing the calendar dramatically. We're going to be in the United States where people can see and interact and enjoy the players and enjoy the competition. And we're hopeful that we'll have the same results in terms of producing quality football players who can make it in the NFL and coaches and officials and front office people as well. In that sense, it augments the NFL. It is not a competitor with the NFL, but it augments the NFL. And we're excited about it.
What's impressive is that you've already got some big names in there, and also it sounds as though you may have one of the models as far as making sure you get good coaches to be involved in this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to. I know who some of the coaches are. We're going to roll them out on a rolling basis here over the next couple of months. So you'll recognize the names, and many of them will be exciting to people. Virtually everyone has had NFL experience. Virtually everyone is an established head coach, and so they're going to bring instant credibility. And players are going to know that, hey, I'm going to be coached by a head coach and by coaching staffs that can get me ready to play football at the highest level. Our slogan is real football by real football people for real football fans. This isn't. There are no gimmicks here. The only thing that's out of the ordinary from the NFL standpoint is a few rule changes, which we feel will enhance the avoidance of injury and make the game a little bit faster and a little bit easier for younger fans to identify with.
What type of rule changes would be involved?
Well, there's going to be no kickoff. We'll start the ball after the coin flip on the 25-yard line. There's going to be no onside kick. If you elect to onside kick, you simply notify the referee, and you start 4th and 10 on your 35-yard line, do or die. And you can do that at any time during the game. There will be only 4 replays per game, 2 per team, all coaches' challenges. So we're not going to have the constant interruption that replay, has the mission creep of replay over the years has kind of creeped into the NFL. We're going back to the original iteration of replay, which is there's a couple or 3 critical plays that change every game. Those are the ones that ought to be replayed, not willy-nilly. And we're going to go with a 30-second clock, which we're sure in talking with many coaches and players, we can, and based on statistics that we've already established in the NFL, that you can operate with a 30-second clock, and that's going to make for a faster game. And because the TV production is going to be pretty markedly different than what people are used to with the NFL, we're going to eliminate virtually 60% of the television commercials. So the game, we're shooting for a 2.5-hour game, and we think we can get it done in elapsed time. The interesting part about this that's unique is that because of the app, it's called the Alliance app, that people can sign up for free, you can actually interact with the game while it's going on. You can play fantasy football inside the game, and that's a brand new concept that has to do with technology, which is far above my pay grade, but it sounds exciting because particularly for the younger generation, they're used to viewing the game on, with multiple screens and playing fantasy and all of that kind of thing. Now you can do it inside the game, which is a revolutionary concept and one that we think is pretty interesting and exciting.
What's it going to take to get, as time goes on, the cooperation of the National Football League, where not necessarily that they would get involved with players and all that stuff, but what type of things would be needed from the NFL that they might be willing to do?
I don't think anything, really. I don't think anything at all. All of the information that's out there is relatively public knowledge as to who's cut and who's out of contract. If they want to come and scout players, we'll make it as easy as possible for them to do. We'll make film available to them. I'm sure they'll be interested in scouting officials. So the door is open. As I said, we're augmenting the NFL, not competing with it. And there really isn't anything they need to do except if they feel the need, take advantage of the ability to scout players and coaches and officials and maybe at some time in the future we can work out a developmental agreement so that young coaches, there are 20 coaches on every NFL staff, and about 7 to 10 of them are involved in off-season projects that have to do with research, film breakdown, etc. And they don't do a lot of coaching on the field. So if the NFL were willing to send a couple of coaches per staff that are young coaches with the accent, we hope, on minorities, we could help develop them on the field and send them back to their NFL teams just at the time when they're needed most.
Is there a way that, like in the NFL Europe, that as time goes on, it could be kind of a feeder system for young officials where you can have the tie-ins where you're trying to develop referees and different type of officials, and there could be tie-ins like that?
Absolutely, without question. And the people we're going to have heading up our officiating are eminently qualified to do that.
That sounds like it's a really adventurous project, and it looks like it's going to. I mean, how did it come together so quickly, or has this been in the works for such a long period of time?
Yeah, we've spent, Charlie and I basically spent a year putting together the plans and the infrastructure, although much of the framework of it was based on my experience with NFL Europe and the USFL. So that framework already existed. All I had to do was edit the written plan that was already in place. So we started with that framework and then built out from there. But it's been a year in the making.
And of course, I would imagine
we just kept it very quiet.
Yeah, no, because again, it just kind of popped up, and then there it was. And it sounds as though you've really got some very solid investors in this.
Oh, we do. We have Peter Chernin, who has been, was a mover and shaker in the growth of Fox. We have Founders Fund, which is a very, very well-respected Silicon Valley firm, and many more. From what Charlie tells me as recently as yesterday, more and more interest to being shown by investors. So it's all positive on that side. And as they say, literally, the bottom line is important because you have to have those investors. Otherwise, you can't make a go of it. There's no way you can exist on either television or gate revenue with the kind of cost that it takes to put a league up and running. You have to have investors with deep pockets.
How did you get to tie in with CBS?
Well, Charlie talked to a number of network people. We went and met with Sean McManus and his staff at CBS, had a very, very productive meeting with them. They were enthusiastic about it. We shared ideas. They gave us their parameters. We indicated to them that we were perfectly willing to deal with the issues that they had in terms of timing and placement and things like that. And the deal came together. It was, I got to say, I was in that meeting, and I got to say that they were enthusiastic really right from the start.
That's great. Now, a couple league things right now. I mean, I know you've been down in Florida where they're meeting, and of course the owners' meeting is going to be down here, and we're in Orlando. What do you think of the changes in the catch rule?
Well, I think it's interesting. If you want to analyze it and break it down, only one thing changed. There are 3 parts to the rule. The first is that you must have possession of the ball. The second is that you must have 2 feet or a body part down in bounds. And third, you must have a time period between the time you actually get your hands on the ball and the time you become a runner. And it's the third part that has been changed, and that is essentially that you must commit a football act. And there will be, I'm told, a very long list of things that define a football act. So it's probably at this point a little bit easier to understand rather than the phrase, you must survive the ground. But that's just language. We'll have to see in the preseason and actually through the regular season, because most rules take 2 years to really fully implement. We'll have to see how it works out. Yeah. I think that there'll be some confusion at first, particularly on how you play loose balls, where a player goes to the ground and the ball comes loose, and then you have to decide whether or not he actually was engaged in a football act or whether it was a fumble. And then there'll be, I think there'll be some controversy about that, because the third part of it is clearly a judgment call. I mean, when you boil it right down, it's a judgment call. So we'll have to see. The short answer is we'll have to see how it works out. I think it'll be a work in progress.
Yeah, I just get worried after when they have the ball in hand, feet on ground, and you have the word and everything after and then adds to the confusion. I hope it tends to work out because they need to get the catch right. But it looks like you've caught a great one right now with the chance that the Alliance of American Football may be able to be the developmental league that has been waiting to happen for some time. Hey, Bill Polian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John. My pleasure.
And that does it for this week's podcast. In between episodes, you can follow me on Twitter at Clayton ESPN. If you enjoy these weekly one-on-one conversations, consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time on Schooled with the Professor.